Joe Echevarria, Chairman and CEO of MBK Alliance. Nice to see you at the Aspen Ideas Festival.
Thanks for having me.
We should probably start with an explanation of what the MBK Alliance is, because it's something very passionate to you now.
Yeah, so if you think about the president, I don't know, 14 months ago announced My Brother's Keeper, and we just spun that off from the White House. It's really about changing the lives of boys and young men of color in this country and giving them a chance at the American dream, simply stated.
Why don't they have a chance still in today's age?
You know, it's fascinating, and me being one of those kids in my life, coming from New York City and the Bronx, they start off with too many disadvantages, and the world has gotten so competitive. So if you come from a single parent household, if you grow up in an area that has poverty, which they're 10 times more likely to, you wind up not hearing enough words. If you don't hear enough words, you don't get literate in reading by the 3rd grade. If you don't do that, you don't tend to graduate from high school. Graduate from high school. We don't hire people anymore who don't graduate from college. So that just starts becoming disconnected from society.
Is part of what we've seen in this country in terms of some of the unrest in cities stemming from this?
Well, I think it stems from the disconnected element of it. Put the race issue aside for the time being. If you're just disconnected, if you're not gainfully employed or you're not getting an education, then you're part of the system. You could be lost in the system, you could be subject to the criminal justice system, but your options are pretty limited if you're disconnected. So does this stem? Sure. Is it the only thing? Probably not.
So there's been a lot of conversation here in Aspen about the role of the private company to do something. So what should private companies do? Listen, as you just pointed out, they don't hire people that don't have certain education. It's a disadvantage for some companies to hire people who are below skill levels that they need.
Right. So if you think about it, the way I like to process this is that there's sort of two sides to this solution. There's a supply side, which is just getting these boys and young men and kids ready, prepared for the right jobs. The demand side is more complicated because that's where race enters into the equation, that's where the criminal justice enters. But the supply side is interesting to the private sector. In 2020, there will be about 22 million new jobs created that are highly skilled and highly paid, and there will only be about 18 million people who can fill them. So it's incumbent on business to fill that gap. If you talk to business with a set of outcomes where they can have an ROI, they're in favor of it. So there's really a business purpose to this. Put aside the right thing to do, they're very much engaged in the outcome.
But how do they get it on the balance sheet? How do they get that ROI? Because that's what their shareholders are going to care about.
That's right, that's right. So the part of it is brand, part of it is are you contributing back, part of it is you partnering with the right people. Look, the big companies in this country already do lots of volunteerism, lots of it, but they don't connect with each other when they do it. My old firm did what they did. All the big companies, they do their own thing in their own way. If we can just rally them to put their capital against a common cause, then it can get some economies of scale and some ROI. That's not the way it works today, though. It's not the way it works.
So how did you do it? You became CEO of Deloitte, one of the biggest companies, inner city kid. So what was it that you were given that you can just use your own personal experience and translate to some of these people who need some help?
Right. So the research has shown, the President's Commission put out a report, and all the big research centers validated that there are about 6 intervention points in the life of one of these boys. First one is when are they ready to enter school? Are they literate? And if you continue the cycle, are they effectively put in a place where they can get secondary education? So for me, what happened was I was essentially raised by my mom. I was in the inner city, and I was probably quasi-literate by the time I got to the 3rd grade. But an intervention took place. Some program helped me. Took me aside, said, here's a kid with some aptitude, but not the right background, and sort of coached me along the way. And that changed me from dreaming to become an auto mechanic to going to college. There's one thing I learned. People give you 2 things. People who believe in you give you confidence. People who don't believe in you give you motivation. And that's what these kids need.
What about an executive that might say to you, hey, this is all great stuff, but we've got government programs. I'm trying to make a profit. I'm competing against everyone on the planet. So how do you balance that?
Right. Yeah, it's a fair statement. So there are government programs, and if government programs could solve it, it'd be fantastic. Okay. But the government doesn't create jobs in this country, and the government doesn't have the same ROI. The government is there to make sure that there's a tipping point, they intervene. The business community are the ones that have an ROI here. They will all tell you that they can't find skilled people. They will all tell you how much it costs to train people. You just have to put it in a way that they're sort of set up an outcome for them, where they can see an ROI and they can see the benefit of investing in a community, in a population, and see some returns in the next 4 or 5 years. You got to make it sort of binary for them. Either do this or you don't.
So are you optimistic going forward?
I'm always optimistic. This is a great country. I'm sitting here talking to you. We're in Aspen, and I'm from the South Bronx.
Let's send it there. It's too good not to. Joe Echevarria, great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.